"What are you doing here?" he asked his brother when they got close to each other. "I'm here to see my damsel Ola," Uchenna replied confidently. Ugonna was confused. He had always called her his mermaid princess and didn't even know her real name. Was it the same girl, he wondered. Just then, Obinna rode in, carrying the bushmeat he had prepared for Ola. His heart skipped a bit when he saw his two brothers standing there, confusion written all over their faces. Once upon a time, in a very beautiful village called Idu, surrounded by the tall and lovely mountains of Ugoma, there lived a very great and wealthy king. His name was Echezona. King Echezona had lots of riches. He had so much silver and gold that it glittered in the sunlight, and he owned many cattle that grazed on the green fields around the village. King Echezona was not only rich but also a kind and humble man. The villagers loved him very much because he always treated them with respect and helped them whenever they needed it. He was known for his generosity, often sharing his wealth with those in need, and he ruled the village with fairness and wisdom. King Echezona was married to a beautiful and gentle queen named Cassie. They loved each other dearly and were always seen together, walking hand in hand through the village and the palace gardens. Their love was so strong that it brought joy to everyone who saw them. Together, King Echezona and Queen Cassie were blessed with 3 wonderful sons. Their names were Obinna, Uchenna, and Ugonna. These young men were so handsome that the village maidens would always wish one of them as husbands. They would gather under the tree after their evening chores, talking about the princes and how handsome they were. They were the dreams of all the village maidens. On the occasions when the princes would march out to the kingdom, the maidens would gather, dressed in their best apparel, throwing gifts and flowers at them, screaming their names just to win their attention. Obinna, the first son, was just like his father, King Echezona. He was brave, kind-hearted, hard-working, and humble. Obinna was always ready to help anyone in need, whether it was a farmer needing help with his crops or a child who had lost a toy. He also loved and admired women and never failed to support them whenever he had the opportunity to do so. He listened to everyone with patience and respect, which made the villagers love him dearly. They admired his strength and his gentle nature. Obinna worked tirelessly to learn all he could about the kingdom, always eager to become a great leader, just like his father. He loved hunting so much, and never goes into the forest and come out empty-handed. His father would always praise him, calling him Obuagu, which means the lion killer. This was a title belonging to their grandfather. He was also a great hunter. When Obinna wasn't hunting, he spent his days training with the soldiers, learning how to fight and defend the village, and helping his father with important decisions. His kindness and bravery made him a favorite among the villagers who hoped he would one day become their king. Uchenna, the second son, was very different from Obinna. Uchenna was handsome and knew it, often admiring himself in mirrors and expecting everyone to do the same. He was full of pride and believed that because he was a prince, everyone should bow at his feet. Uchenna enjoyed riding through the village on his beautiful white horse, always surrounded by a group of guards. He would command the villagers to bow to him, and if they did not, he would punish them severely. He loved to show off his fine, expensive clothes and jewelry, and he would often hold grand parades just to display his wealth and status. The villagers did not like Uchenna at all. They thought he was arrogant and mean, and they were glad that he was not the king's first son. They feared what might happen if Uchenna ever became king, and they often whispered amongst themselves about how different he was from his kind father and brother. Ugonna was the king's youngest son. He was a very playful young man who loved to joke and have fun. Ugonna could often be found telling funny stories that made everyone laugh. This made him a good company in the palace. He was a very happy young man. However, Ugonna had a very big problem. He could not discern between good advice and a bad one. This made him seem very foolish. Ugonna would often ask for advice from anyone he met, even if he knew they were not trustworthy. He would take the advice of people who did not have his best interest at heart, and this got him into a lot of trouble. One time, Ugonna followed the advice of a mischievous boy who told him to climb the tallest tree in the village to prove his strength. Ugonna did so, but then got stuck at the top and began screaming for help. The villagers gathered and rescued him. Another time, Ugonna trusted a man who was secretly an enemy of the king. The man gave Ugonna bad advice that led him straight into a dangerous trap. He told him to go to the forest at midnight and that he would meet good spirits who would bless him with great riches, and he would become richer than his father, the king. Ugonna believed him without thinking twice and was almost killed by wild animals in the forest, if not for his brother Obinna, who rescued him, although the man was punished by the king. The villagers loved Ugonna because he was very friendly and made everyone laugh, but they also worried about him because he was so easily fooled. They hoped that one day he would learn to be wiser and more careful. Despite their differences, the three brothers loved and respected each other very much. Obinna always looked out for his younger brothers, trying to guide them and protect them. Uchenna, though prideful, respected Obinna's strength and leadership. Ugonna admired both of his older brothers and tried to learn from them, even if he often made mistakes. The villagers watched the three princes grow, hoping that one day they would all find their own ways to be great leaders, just like their father, King Echezona. Every evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned orange and pink, the three princes would come together to sit in the royal garden. This was their special time away from their duties and the hustle and bustle of the palace. They would find a cozy spot under the big old tree where they could see the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky. It was their favorite part of the day because it was time for sharing stories and enjoying each other's company. Obinna, the eldest, would often start with tales of bravery and adventure. He loved talking about the history of their kingdom and the great deeds of their ancestors. He would describe the battles their fathers had fought to protect their land and the wise decisions made by their forefathers to ensure peace and prosperity. Obinna's stories were always exciting and filled with lessons about courage and leadership. When Obinna had finished, Uchenna would sometimes share stories about the people he met and the things he saw during his daily rides through the village. Though he was proud and often boastful, he had a way with words that made his stories interesting. He would talk about the beautiful places he had visited, the grand parades he had led, and the compliments he received from the villagers, even if they were not entirely true. Despite his arrogance, his brothers enjoyed listening to his tales, finding them amusing and full of imagination. However, the real highlight of their evening gatherings was when Ugonna, the youngest, began to tell his funny stories. Ugonna had a special talent for making his brothers laugh. He would recall the silly things that happened to him during the day, like the time he got stuck in a tree or when he followed a goat thinking it would lead him to treasure. His stories were filled with playful exaggerations and humorous twists. Ugonna would act out the characters in his tales, making funny faces and voices that had Obinna and Ucha laughing until their sides hurt. Even on days where there were no new stories to tell, Ugonna could always come up with something funny to entertain his brothers. He would create imaginary adventures or remember old tales with a fresh, hilarious spin. His laughter was infectious, and soon all three brothers would be rolling on the ground, tears of joy streaming down their faces. The bond between the three princes was strong and unbreakable. They cherished these moments together, forgetting their differences and enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. Their laughter echoed through the garden, a sound that brought joy to everyone who heard it. King Echezna and Queen Cassie often watched their sons from a distance, their hearts filled with love and pride. They were delighted to see how close their sons were, despite their different personalities. The king and queen knew that these moments of togetherness were precious and would help their sons grow into wise and compassionate leaders. One beautiful evening, as the golden sun began to set and the sky turned into shades of orange, Prince Obinna decided to go hunt in the forest. He loved the peaceful feeling in the forest with its tall trees, singing birds and the peacefulness it brought. The air was filled with the sweet scent of flowers, and leaves rustled gently in the breeze. As he walked along the familiar path, thinking about his duties and the stories he would share with his brothers later, he suddenly noticed someone up ahead. There, on the narrow path leading back to the village, was a very beautiful maiden. She was carrying a basket of freshly harvested crops. The maiden's long hair shimmered in the fading sunlight, and her eyes sparkled with joy. When she saw Prince Obinna approaching, she smiled warmly and bowed deeply to show her respect. Obinna felt his heart skip a beat. There was something so magical about her. It wasn't just her beauty that captivated him, but also her gentle and graceful nature. When she spoke, her voice was like a sweet melody, soft and soothing. Her smile was so bright and genuine that it made Obinna's heart feel light and happy. He found himself unable to look away, completely enchanted by her presence. It was as if the entire world had stopped, and only she existed. After a moment, Obinna managed to find his voice. "Whose daughter are you?" he asked, trying to sound calm even though his heart was racing. The maiden looked at him with kind eyes and replied, "I am Chief Okeke's daughter." "Wow," Obinna exclaimed, his eyes widening in surprise. "I know him. He is one of my father's close men. I didn't know he had such a beautiful daughter." He smiled at her, feeling a connection he never felt before. "I will surely see you again," he added, still in awe of her beauty and grace. The maiden smiled shyly and nodded. "Thank you, my prince," she said softly, bowing. Obinna continued his walk into the forest, but his mind was no longer on the trees or the birds. He couldn't stop thinking about the maiden. Her face, her smile, her voice, everything about her was perfect. He felt as if he had been struck by a magical spell, making him think of nothing else but her. The more he thought about her, the more he wanted to see her again. as he wandered deeper into the forest. He replayed their encounter over and over in his mind. He imagined what it would be like to talk to her again, to learn more about her and to share stories with her, just as he did with his brothers. The idea of seeing her smile once more filled him with a sense of excitement and happiness. He had forgotten to ask about her name. When Obinna finally returned to the palace, his heart was full of thoughts of the beautiful maiden. That evening, as he sat with his brothers under the big old tree, he couldn't help but share his experience with them. He told them about the magical maiden he had met, describing her beauty and grace in great detail. Uchenna and Ugonna listened with wide eyes and smiles, happy to see their brother so enchanted. After Obinna finished sharing his stories about the beautiful maiden he had met, Uchenna jumped in with excitement. He began to describe the kind of woman he dreamed of marrying. She would be a princess from a famous and wealthy kingdom, he said, his eyes sparkling. She must be so charming and beautiful that when I parade through the village with her, all the local girls will be amazed and stunned by her beauty, not wanting to be left out. Ugonna also described his ideal woman. The truth was that he had never thought of the kind of woman he wanted. She must be very beautiful and curvy, he said with a big grin. And she must have a wonderful smile because she will be laughing a lot at all my jokes. I want someone who can share my joy and make every day fun. The three brothers laughed heartily together, enjoying this new topic of conversation. It was the first time they had ever talked about women and their dreams of the future. They teased each other and shared more thoughts about what they had imagined their future wives to be like. It was a special evening for the brothers, filled with laughter and dreams of love. The bond between them grew even stronger as they shared their hopes and fantasies. The next day, Uchenna went on one of his usual parades through the village, riding his splendid horse and surrounded by his loyal bodyguards. As he trotted down the main path, he spotted a group of maidens heading towards the stream to fetch water. The maidens noticed the prince approaching and quickly stopped, bowing deeply and smiling, hoping to catch his attention. They giggled and blushed, making funny faces to try and impress him. But among them was one maiden who simply greeted the prince with a polite bow and then continued without stopping. This was unusual for Uchenna as he was accustomed to receiving adoration from everyone he encountered. He watched her walk away, puzzled and slightly irritated. The other maidens, seeing that the prince wasn't paying them any attention, continued on their way, feeling disappointed. Uchenna couldn't get the image of the indifferent maiden out of his mind. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small mirror he always carried. He glanced at his reflection to make sure he still looked as handsome as ever. "Of course I do," he muttered to himself. "Who does this maiden think she is?" Turning to one of his trusted guards, Uchenna asked, "Who is that maiden who just walked past me?" The guard, looking equally puzzled, replied, "My prince, I do not know her, but I can find out for you." The prince, his pride wounded by the maiden's lack of interest, felt a burning need to assert his authority. He ordered his guards to follow the maidens to the stream. As they arrived, they saw the maiden, whose name was Ola, finishing her task of fetching water. She was about to lift the heavy pot onto her head when Uchenna strode up to her, his expression stern. "I want you to get some water and wash my feet," he commanded, his voice full of authority. Ola looked up at him calmly and replied, "I'm sorry, my prince, but your feet are not dirty." Everyone at the stream gasped in shock. No one had ever dared to speak to the prince in such a manner. The other maidens and guards stared wide-eyed as Ola turned back to her water, ready to lift it again. Uchenna, infuriated, shouted, "I order you to stop now as your prince." Ola turned to face him, her eyes blazing with defiance. "What have I done wrong? Just because you are a prince, you think you can bully everyone? Is that what princes are supposed to do? You should be protecting your people and not making them feel they need to be protected from you. I don't care who you are, but I won't let you treat me badly for no just reason." With that, Ola lifted her water pot and walked away, with her head held high, leaving everyone, including Uchenna, speechless. No one had ever dared to stand up to the prince like that before. The guards, expecting the prince to react angrily, were stunned when he simply turned and walked back towards the palace with his head lowered in shame. His pride had taken a serious blow, and his grand parade had been completely ruined. As he made his way back home, Uchenna couldn't stop thinking about Ola. Her words echoed in his mind, making him reflect on his actions. He realized that perhaps there was more to being a prince than just demanding respect and admiration. That evening, Uchenna sat quietly with his brothers, not sharing any grand stories or boasting about his day. Instead, he listened to Obinna and Ugonna, thinking deeply about what had happened. The encounter with Ola had stirred something within him, and he longed to know this maiden better. Ola had heard many stories about Prince Uchenna, and they made her feel sick. People said he was so full of himself, and the entire village was scared of him. She hated how he walked around as if he were a god and made everyone bow down to him. He acted like he was better than everyone else, and this made Ola so angry. She wished he would learn to be humble and kind like his brother Obinna. That night, Uchenna couldn't sleep at all. He lay in bed, tossing and turning, thinking about the maiden he had met at the stream. Ola's face kept appearing in his mind. She was so beautiful, with her sparkling eyes. But it wasn't just her beauty that made Uchenna restless. It was her courage. She was the first person who had ever stood up to him. While everyone else ran from him in fear, she had looked him in the eye and told him the truth. His anger towards her was slowly turning into something else, something he had never felt before. He realized he was falling for her. The next morning, as the sun rose and the birds began to sing, one of Uchenna's trusted guards brought him some information about the maiden. "My prince," the guard said, bowing respectfully, "the maiden you asked about is Chief Okeke's daughter. Her name is Ola." The name Okeke struck a chord in Uchenna's mind. He remembered hearing that name recently, but he couldn't place where. Then it dawned on him. Chief Okeke was one of his father's most trusted chiefs. He was wise and respected in the entire village. Uchenna felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He longed to see Ola again and talk to her. He wanted to understand her better and maybe even apologize for his rude behavior. Throughout that day, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He wondered what she was doing and if she was also thinking about him. He wanted to see her, but he knew he had to approach her differently this time. He couldn't just command her to come to him. He needed to show her that he was not the arrogant prince she thought he was. He had to earn her respect and maybe even her friendship. he decided to visit Chief Okeke's house. He knew that by showing respect to her father, he might get a chance to see Ola again. He went there with some gifts for the chief. When he arrived at the chief's house, he was greeted warmly. Chief Okeke welcomed him inside, surprised but pleased to see the prince. Uchenna tried to act as humble and respectful as possible. He talked to Chief Okeke about important matters in the village and listened carefully to his wise advice. As they were talking, Ola entered the room carrying a tray of refreshments. She was surprised to see Uchenna there and hesitated for a moment. Uchenna's heart skipped a beat when he saw her. He stood up and smiled at her, trying to show her that he meant no harm. Ola nodded politely and placed the tray on the table. "Thank you, Ola," Uchenna said, his voice gentle. Ola looked at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. She could see that something had changed in the prince. He seemed different, less arrogant and more genuine. She wondered why he had visited. This was the first time she had ever seen him in their home. After a while, her father called for her, saying that the prince was about to leave and had something to say to her. Ola walked out and saw Uchenna waiting for her. They walked outside together because the prince needed privacy to talk to her. As they strolled through the garden, Uchenna looked at her with a serious expression. "Yesterday, you told me what no one had ever said to me," he began. "At first, my pride was hurt, but since then your voice has kept on ringing in my head. I want to apologize for my actions towards you. I realize now how wrong I was, and today I promise to be a better person." Ola watched him closely. She could see the sincerity in his eyes and hear it in his voice. She was impressed by his honesty and willingness to change. A smile slowly spread across her face, and seeing her smile made Uchenna's heart melt. She looked so beautiful, just like a goddess, and he felt a deep admiration for her. The prince then bade her goodbye, feeling more determined than ever to keep his promise. As he left, he knew that he wanted to be a better person, not just for himself or his people, but also for her. That night, as the three brothers sat together under the big old tree in the garden, they were all bustling with excitement and eager to share their good news. The stars twinkled above them and the cool evening breeze rustled the leaves gently. It was the perfect setting for their heartwarming tales. Ugonna was the first to begin, his eyes sparkling as he recalled his encounter. "I saw a very beautiful maiden today," he started with a grin. "I went down to the river as I do often to admire the beautiful blue water. But today was different. As I approached, I saw her sitting at the riverbank, gazing at the water. She looked so perfect that for a moment, I thought she was a mermaid. I've never seen anyone so beautiful before." He paused for effect, watching his brothers' eager faces. She was just sitting there, so peaceful, so graceful. I felt like the river itself had become more beautiful because of her. So, I gathered my courage and said to her, "I always thought this river was beautiful, but now I realize that its beauty is nothing compared to yours." I almost fell staring at you. Obinna and Uchenna chuckled, knowing their brother's flair for dramatic statements. "Guess what happened next?" Ugonna continued, his grin widening. She burst into laughter. It was the most delightful sound, like music. I felt as if I was surrounded by angels. "I found her," he exclaimed, his excitement palpable. the woman of my dreams." The two other princes laughed heartily, clapping Ugonna on the back. "You are so romantic," they commended him, appreciating his boldness and charm. Uchenna then shared his experience at the river from the other day. He recounted how he had met a maiden who was Chief Okeke's daughter. He described how she stood up to him, her bravery, and how it had left a deep impression on him. As Uchenna spoke, Obinna's interest was piqued. Could it be the same Chief Okeke? There was only one Chief Okeke in the village after all. Obinna's mind raced with thoughts. He wondered if Chief Okeke had several daughters. The idea intrigued him, but he didn't want to interrupt Uchenna's story. He could see the excitement in his brother's eyes as he narrated his encounter. But inside, Obinna felt a stirring of curiosity and concern. All through the night, Obinna was restless and couldn't sleep. He kept on turning on his bed, his mind filled with worry. He just hoped that his fears weren't true. The next morning, determined to find out the truth, Obinna took a keg of fresh palm wine and, accompanied by his trusted guard, headed for Chief Okeke's house. He needed to know if the chief had other daughters. When they arrived, Chief Okeke was surprised to see Prince Obinna at his doorstep. It was an honor to have him visit, as Obinna was well loved and respected in the village. The chief welcomed him warmly into his home, unable to stop singing Obinna's praises. But he was curious, wondering why the princes had been visiting him lately. After exchanging pleasantries, Obinna got straight to the point. "Chief, I'm sorry for being so direct, but I would like to know if you have more than one daughter." Chief Okeke laughed heartily. "You talk just like your father, always so polite. But to answer your question, no. It's just one girl that the gods had chosen to give me. Her name is Ola. The other little girl here is my late brother's daughter." Just then, Ola walked into the room carrying a tray of refreshments. She smiled sweetly when she saw Prince Obinna, and at that moment, he forgot everything else. His whole attention was fixed on her. The chief continued talking, but Obinna didn't hear a single word he said. He was completely mesmerized by Ola's presence. As he rode home, his mind was in turmoil. He now knew for certain that both him and Obinna were in love with the same woman. It sounded crazy as he thought about it. How on earth did this even happen, he asked himself over and over. He had always been the big brother, looking out for Uchenna and Ugonna and allowing them to have whatever they desired. But this time, things were different. For the first time in his life, Obinna felt a fierce determination to fight for what he wanted. This was not just any desire, this was about love. Ola was the only woman who had ever made him feel this way, and he was not going to step aside, even for his brother. He resolved to win her heart, no matter what it took. As he approached the palace, Obinna knew that he had a difficult path ahead. He would have to navigate his feelings, his loyalty to his brother, and his deep love for Ola. But one thing was certain. He was ready to fight for her. To show her that his love was true and unwavering. And so, with his heart set on this new journey, Prince Obinna prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, driven by the powerful force of love. That night, the sky was filled with beautiful stars that twinkled like tiny diamonds, casting a gentle glow over the village of Idu. Obinna had caught a big antelope earlier in the day, and feeling proud of his catch, he ordered his guards to roast it and wrap the best part in a leaf. He planned to take it to Ola the next day as a special gift, hoping to win her favor with his thoughtfulness. as the three brothers sat under the grand old tree in their garden. Uchenna and Obinna were lost in their thoughts about Ola, while Ugonna chatted excitedly about his imaginary mermaid princess. Ugonna's enthusiasm was contagious, and he was eager to get some advice from his older brothers. "Tell me, Uchenna," Ugonna asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. "I want to win her heart and marry her. What do I need to do?" Uchenna, always ready with a plan, looked at his younger brother with a mischievous smile. "Go to the Oye market tomorrow and buy the biggest bushmeat you can find. Take it to her and say these words: 'I am not a hunter, but for you I'll kill all the animals in the forest. Even if you want the entire kingdom, I'll give it to you.'" Ugonna looked puzzled. "But you know I can't do all that," he said, frowning. Uchenna chuckled, shaking his head. "Women love lies," he said confidently. "They hate the truth. Lying is the only way you can win her heart. Boast. Tell her how strong you are. Tell her how you fought with a lion to get this bushmeat for her. By the time you are done, she will not only give you her heart, but will beg you to marry her." Ugonna, being a foolish man, believed his brother, thinking it was a great idea. He imagined himself telling the grand story and seeing the maiden's eyes light up with admiration. Meanwhile, Obinna was only half listening to their conversation. His mind was entirely focused on how he would meet Ola the next day. He replayed the moment he had seen her at Chief Okeke's house, her sweet smiles, and the way she had captivated him completely. He hoped that the gift of the roasted antelope would show her his sincerity and win her favor. As the night grew darker and the stars shone even brighter, Obinna felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He knew that he would have to compete with Uchenna for Ola's affection, but he also felt a deep connection with her that he couldn't ignore. He thought about what he would say to her, how he would express his feelings, and how he would show her that his love was true and genuine. The next morning, Ugonna did exactly what his brother had advised him to do. He went to the market and bought a big grass cutter. Then, with his guard by his side, he headed to the mermaid princess's house. Chief Okeke was puzzled. In just 3 days, all 3 princes had visited his home. He wondered what was going on. When Ola saw Ugonna approaching, she was surprised. "My prince," she said politely, "I never knew you were serious about coming to visit me." Ugonna smiled and offered her the bushmeat. Remembering Uchenna's advice, he began to boast. "I fought a lion just to get you this bushmeat," he said proudly. "I can do anything for you." Ola laughed so hard as she listened to Ugonna's exaggerated tales. She knew Ugonna was weak and wasn't a hunter. She didn't need anyone to tell her that he was lying. After he had gone on and on, she gently interrupted him. "My prince, you don't need to lie to me. Any woman who loves you will love you for who you are. You don't need to lie to impress anyone." Ugonna bowed his head in shame. This was completely different from what Uchenna had told him. Uchenna had said that women loved lies. Ola then rejected the bushmeat, saying she would never accept anything that came from a heart filled with lies. As Ugonna was leaving the compound sadly, he was surprised to see Uchenna riding in. "What are you doing here?" he asked his brother when they got close to each other. "I'm here to see my damsel Ola," Uchenna replied confidently. Ugonna was confused. He had always called her his mermaid princess and didn't even know her real name. Was it the same girl, he wondered? "And what are you doing here?" Uchenna threw the question back at his brother. "This is where my mermaid princess lives," Ugonna said. The two brothers stared at each other, puzzled. Uchenna wondered if Chief Okeke had more than one daughter, not wanting to believe that they were both in love with the same girl. Just then, Obinna rode in, carrying the bushmeat he had prepared for Ola. His heart skipped a beat when he saw his two brothers standing there, confusion written all over their faces. What was going on, he wondered. The three brothers turned and faced each other, looking both confused and surprised. At that moment, Ola stepped out of the house. She had been watching from her window and decided to see what all the commotion was about. "This is my mermaid princess," Ugonna said. Immediately she stepped out. "She is my damsel," Uchenna replied angrily. Everyone was silent as the realization sank in. Finally, Obinna spoke up, breaking the tension. "She is the woman I love," he said firmly. The air was thick with confusion and emotions as the three brothers realized that they were all in love with the same girl. Ugonna charged towards Uchenna, his face red with anger. "You knew Ola was my mermaid princess all along. That was why you advised me to go make a fool of myself for your own selfish reasons. Now she thinks I'm foolish," he shouted angrily. Obinna knew it was wrong for the princess to fight in public, so he rushed to hold back Ugonna. "Let's go home. We'll figure this out," he pleaded, trying to calm the situation. Ola stood in shock, watching the princess argue in amazement. What? The three princes loved her. She wiped her eyes to make sure she wasn't dreaming. She respected Obinna a lot. She thought Uchenna had only come to apologize the other day. It was only Ugonna that had professed his love for her. This was the strangest thing she had ever seen. Unable to handle the drama, she ran into her room. "I met her before you," Uchenna said angrily when they got home. "No, you lie. I met her first," Ugonna retorted, the two brothers pointing fingers at each other. "Will you two stop this?" Obinna screamed. The three brothers sat under the tree in silence. Obinna had thought that only he and Uchenna loved Ola, but now that Ugonna was involved, things were even more complicated. They had grown up loving each other despite their differences, and now they had to find a way to sort this out. Obinna cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, Uchenna. I found out yesterday but didn't tell you that we both loved the same girl because of my own selfish interest. It isn't anyone's fault as we all met her on different occasions. Now, all we need to do is to figure out a solution." The other two brothers nodded, paying full attention. They respected Obinna's wisdom a lot. He continued, "We can't kill love and we can't force it either. We need to be honest with our feelings. We can let her know how we feel, and then give her a chance to choose who she wants to be with. What are your thoughts?" They all stared at each other, considering his words. Finally, they nodded in agreement, thinking it was a good idea. Now, Obinna continued, "We are not allowed to fight over her. No matter what happens, we remain brothers in love forever." They both nodded in agreement, and together they echoed the word brothers. With their bond reaffirmed, the three princes felt a sense of relief. They knew that whatever the outcome, their brotherly love would endure and they would face the future together. The race to win Ola's heart began, with the brothers trying all they could to capture her affection. Ugonna would visit with gifts, expressing his love and adoration for her. Uchenna, on the other hand, would boast, telling Ola why she should choose him above his brothers. "I am the most handsome of them all," he would say proudly. "I will treat you better than anyone. Haven't you seen how I changed for you?" He would go on and on about how he would become rich and build an empire with his share of his father's wealth, and then make her his empress. He thought telling her all this would convince her to marry him. Ola found Uchenna's arrogance amusing. She realized that he still needed to work on himself. He was still so full of himself, believing that he was better than everyone else. Meanwhile, Obinna decided to give Ola some space so she could think. He loved her deeply, and though it was hard for him, he didn't want her to feel pressured or overwhelmed. He saw her as a person and not a trophy to be won. Ola didn't take the other two brothers seriously. While Ugonna seemed to be childish, Uchenna was too arrogant. But she really liked Obinna. She would sit in her room daily, thinking about him, looking out of her window and waiting for his visits, but he never came. One day, she decided to seek him out on the path where they had met the first time. That evening, as Obinna was returning from his hunting, he saw Ola standing at the entrance of the forest. It looked like she was waiting for him. When he got closer, she stepped forward to face him. "Greetings, my prince," she said, bowing respectfully. Obinna looked at her, noticing she looked more beautiful than the last time he had seen her. He was so happy to see her after a while. "You always look great, Ola," he said, admiring her beauty. "Thank you, my prince. But something bothers me." The prince's eyebrow was raised in concern as he wondered what it could be. Then she continued, "That day you said before your brothers that you loved me. Did you really mean it?" The prince stared at her in shock. "Yes, graceful maiden. I am royalty and would never say what I don't mean." This lightened her heart. "If that's the case, why haven't you come for me? I stand at my window every day, watching and waiting for you to come for me," she said, tears glistening in her eyes, as if it was difficult to say those words. "You are not some sort of trophy, Ola. I value you beyond that. I didn't want to force my love on you. It's been hard for me, but I wanted you to make your choice without feeling pressured." "I love you," she said to the prince. "What? What did you just say?" the prince asked again, making sure he heard her correctly. "I always loved you," she said again. "I love how kind and humble you are to everyone, and I want to be with you." The prince was amazed. This was like a dream come true. He swept Ola into a warm embrace. He was so excited and couldn't stop admiring the bravery of the young maiden. From that moment on, they knew that they were meant to be together. Ola shared all that had been happening with her father. She had finally made her choice. Chief Okeke invited the princess over for lunch. Ola was ready to make her decision known to the brothers so they would stop bothering her. After the meal, the three brothers sat with Chief Okeke and his daughter. The chief, who had lost his wife a few years back, watched closely as his daughter prepared to speak. Ugonna and Uchenna were hopeful. Ugonna saw how hard she had laughed at his jokes, and Uchenna saw how she listened to him with rapt attention. But Ola chose Obinna. The other two brothers were shocked. "I want a man who is wise and kind to everyone and not just me," she said. Without waiting for her to say anything more, the two rejected brothers bolted out of Chief Okeke's house, looking so disappointed. Obinna knew they would get over it. For weeks, The entire palace was cold. Uchenna was withdrawn, while Ugonna's jokes and laughter were greatly missed by everyone. Obinna was worried about his brothers. He never wanted a woman to come between them. He wondered if it was right to be with Ola, seeing that his brothers were sad. Ola was worried too. For weeks, she hadn't seen Obinna and wondered what was going on. Had he abandoned her? Does he not love her again? So many things played in her mind. She decided to visit the palace since he hadn't been hunting. Ugonna was the first to see her, and although she had rejected him, there was just something about her that would compel one to always like her. It was more than just her beauty. She greeted him cheerfully, but it didn't hide her worries. She told him why she had come to the palace. Ugonna, feeling sorry for her, helped in looking around, but Obinna didn't seem to be anywhere in the palace. Seeing how sad she was, he promised to talk to him when he returned. That night, under the bright sky filled with stars, the princess sat again under the big tree. Ugonna had called for the meeting, as it had been weeks since they sat together. They needed to go back to being brothers. Ola was here, he began. She is worried about you, Obinna. I have spoken with Uche, and we have both accepted the fact that we were rejected. It's best she be with you. She loves you so much. And for us, we have learned a lot from this and will eventually find our own woman who loves us as much as we love her. Yes, my brother, Uchenna added. Go for her. We know you are worried about how we may feel, but you can't sacrifice your happiness for our sake. She was the one who chose you. Remember, we promised to accept whatever decision she makes and not allow it to break our love for each other. I've truly learned my lesson, and you are such a wonderful big brother. Tears welled up in Obinna's eyes as he watched and listened to his brothers. He realized that what they shared was strong. This selflessness displayed by his brothers was something he would never forget. They hugged one another as their laughter roared once again through the walls of the palace. A few months later, in an elaborate ceremony, Prince Obinna got married to Ola. It was a grand event and people couldn't stop saying how lucky Ola was. The entire village turned out in large numbers for the celebration. It was indeed a happy day. The story of the three princes who fell in love with one maiden amazed the entire kingdom. But what marveled the village the most was the wisdom and grace with which the brothers handled the matter. The bond between the three brothers remained strong. They never stopped loving and looking out for each other. When Obinna became king after his father, with his wife's support, the entire kingdom flourished and even became greater than it was. Hey besties, thank you so much for watching this amazing story and I hope you enjoyed it. I would like you to share your lessons in the comment section so that we all can read and learn from it. And if you are yet to subscribe to this channel, do not skip this video without hitting the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell so that you get notified whenever we post new stories. Thank you so much for all your love and support and your beautiful comments. I enjoy reading them a lot. Right now, I'll have to go and see you in our next story. Bye!